This paper is called "If I Don't Input Those Numbers, It Doesn't Make Much of a Difference: Insulated, Precarity, Engendered Labor and Friends." I want to dedicate this paper to my head of department, Marcus Leaning, who just departed 5 minutes ago to get his train. When I told him that I was working on Friends, he said, "I hate Friends, it makes me want to bang my head against the wall." So this one goes out to Marcus. This is a shorter version of an article that I'm writing for a special edition on Friends that I'm editing. It's also part of a larger project on Generation X and the 90s that I'm writing with a couple other colleagues. And I'm particularly interested in the ways in which the 90s are increasingly being projected through the lens of nostalgia as a kind of period before the 2008 crash, the period before 9/11, a period in which there was still hope in third-way politics, and increasingly also the period before the internet, because the discourse that surrounds the internet these days increasingly is that the internet has been bastardized, or it's been used as surveillance, rather than in the early 90s especially, when it was seen as a kind of vision of hope for the future. So that's the context with which I'm going to be talking today. So, is this off-putting? I can flip through if you don't want to see that GIF. There we go. Okay, so the implausibility of a group of 20-somethings who spend most of their time lounging around drinking coffee, being able to afford sizable Manhattan apartments, and enjoying relatively privileged lifestyles was often noted by fans and critics during the original run of Friends. Indeed, this is knowingly acknowledged at regular points throughout the series, not least in the very final scene, which was watched by an audience of over 50 million in the US alone, when all the characters are about to leave Monica and Chandler's apartment for the last time, and Chandler says, "It was a happy place, filled with love and laughter, but more importantly, because of rent control, it was a friggin' steal." Viewed from the other side of the 2008 financial crisis, when politicians' claims of economic recovery and rising employment are betrayed by a growing precariat, falling wages, rising rents, pension crises, and widespread anxieties about labor across the global north, what I'm calling the insulated precarity of Friends' multiple protagonists and their seeming nonchalance about work not only marks out the show as a prime example of a Clinton-Blair-era boom text, but also serves to account, at least in part, for the show's enduring popularity in the contemporary period. This insulated precarity, I want to argue, allows anxieties about socio-cultural changes wrought by neoliberalism and the financialization of capitalism to be elaborated and played out in a safe space, circumscribed by the conventions of the sitcom genre, whereby the daily concerns about work and careers provide humor rather than avert stress, and which are framed within broader, conservative, happy ever after life narratives. So in this paper, I want to consider the effective appeal of Friends, especially as a source of comfort in an era of increasing social stratification as brought to bear by the abhorrent neoliberal policies of austerity carried out in the name of individual responsibility and economic efficiency. As such, I'm reading Friends as a text doubly imbued with both types of nostalgia theorized by Svetlana Boym in her 2001 book, The Future of Nostalgia. First, through what she calls restorative nostalgia, whereby looking backwards to a long-lost world is sentimental, romantic, and essentially conservative. And secondly, through what she calls reflective nostalgia, whereby looking to the past critically has the potential to be productive and even transformational in looking to the future. Using Boym's formulation allows me to consider the comfort the show brings me and my wife, who we tend to turn the show off after a long day's work, turn the show on after a long day's work, to enjoy episodes we've seen countless times before. And it accounts for the enduring appeal to a new generation of students. Now, it consistently strikes me that Friends remains wildly popular with my own students, and is, in my experience at least, the one text that has endured from my own time as an undergraduate that one can rely on in class as an example text with which everyone is familiar. In the digital age of media dispersal, this is true of increasingly fewer texts. Part of the enduring appeal of Friends, I want to argue, is that it is a paean to an earlier age of work culture and community before the ideologies of individualism and efficiency overwhelmed the collective consciousness of Western culture. Concurrently, I want to suggest that Friends can be seen as a document of the precise historical moment when this change occurs, and want to take from a critical standpoint its overt restorative nostalgia and twist it into the reflective nostalgia that Boym argues can be productive. While I'm in no way arguing for Friends as a radical text, I do think it is one text that tells us something about the growing anxieties about work culture at the turn of the century, and crucially, in terms of its enduring popularity, one that serves to index how far things have altered since then. Because things have got demonstrably worse for the majority of working people in the 20 years since it first aired, in terms of employment conditions, wages, and rising anxieties, the show is increasingly loaded with nostalgia for a pre-crash economy where, for most characters at least, jobs were meaningful and long-term narratives could be imagined and projected into the future. The one character in Friends for whom this is not true, and I will seek to show this, is Chandler Bing, whom we saw in the bath there, who until late on in the series is in a job he largely despises. I want to suggest that Chandler is the one character through which the show explicitly deals with issues of neoliberal work culture, and I want to suggest that Chandler's problems with work are linked deeply to his anxieties about masculinity, which is inflected in particular ways in comparison to the other male characters. Friends, I would argue, does not explicitly critique the circumstances it inhabits, but it does invite us, from a critical scholarly perspective, to consider these circumstances because of the repetition of plot lines, individual set pieces, and jokes about work and working life that appear regularly throughout the series. Indeed, along with romantic plot lines, I'd argue that issues of work and career account for one of the most dominant ideological frameworks through which Friends both functions as a comedy and as a document of the particularities of the changes to middle-class work culture at that particular juncture in the history of American capitalism. Okay, so that's my intro. So, a common thread in recent years in research by sociologists and anthropologists of work and working culture has been to emphasize the ways in which changes to work patterns, that is to say, the move from long-term stable employment to short-term flexible contracts, has altered the way workers think about and imagine their lives, and indeed their futures. Richard Sennett, for example, on the right-hand side there, in The Culture of the New Capitalism, writes about how these new unstable working conditions don't allow long-term planning, which has clear implications on what the dominant ideology calls, problematically, the traditional family unit. Sennett's work on this chimes well with Zygmunt Bauman's series of books on liquid modernity, which we see there in the middle. And Jeremy Gilbert, meanwhile, in his brilliant book on anti-capitalism and cultural studies, emphasizes how, quote, much of what we think of today as traditional, the nuclear family, the job for life, the suburban neighborhood, is actually a product of decades of Fordism, which created very stable working conditions of capital accumulation, but kept financial capital on a tight leash. Neoliberalism has dislocated and destabilized the key sources of personal and social identity. As many Marxist and Marxian-inflected writers have suggested, David Harvey being another example, as labor has weakened in relation to capital, compared to the golden age of the welfare state, it's not surprising that work has become more precarious. It was only through the rise of labor power that capitalism throughout the early to mid-20th century was forced into developing such social benefits such as the welfare state. Andrew Ross, in his book Nice Work If You Can Get It, shows how the benefits and securities of the Keynesian era dissolved in the face of the shift from industry to information, and secure long-term employment was replaced by freelancers, temps, adjuncts, and migrants. While Melissa Gregg, in Work's Intimacy, notes that, quote, in the years preceding the recent economic downturn, a range of commentators failed to appreciate the extent to which middle-class professionals had been encouraged to see their work as the most significant demonstration of their success and identity. She argues that the discourse of work-life balance disfigured and camouflaged the fact that work experience was getting relatively worse. So, it is this socio-historical shift that, I'd argue, that Friends engages with, albeit fairly gently. The fact that the characters spend so much of their time lounging about, seemingly rarely going to work, and rarely being anxious about work, invites us to be nostalgic about an earlier culture whereby work was less stressful, competitive, and all-encompassing, where there was time to be reflective or even just to do nothing. Now, the history of capitalism goes sort of in three stages. Anxiety is the dominant effect in this neoliberal era. In Victorianism, it was misery, and during Fordism, it was boredom. So we've moved from misery, boredom, anxiety. So with the banality of the coffee shop as the background in Friends, the show does, however, regularly invite us to consider each character's anxieties about their chosen professions with varying degrees of stress attached. The trajectory of Joey's career as an actor, Monica's career as a chef, and Phoebe's career as a musician and masseuse all feature the ups and downs of typical careers without anxiety about work becoming the defining characteristic of each respective character. And even when there are problems at work, such as when Joey is killed off from Days of Their Lives, Monica gets herself fired for misunderstanding company policy on taking home food from work, or Phoebe biting a client's ass, there is always a safety net in place to ensure that these problems don't become crises. In the case of Joey and Monica, there's always someone to pay their way, at least temporarily. Chandler pays for Joey and her parents pay for Monica. In the case of Phoebe, it's never explained how she manages to afford anything. As such, work troubles are never terminal, and they're usually dealt with, as we would expect in a sitcom, in a humorous way. Think about how little stress about work Ross, the academic, is seen to endure. Beyond having to find novel ways of getting to his class on time, having had back-to-back classes scheduled for him by the university's administration department, and one obvious example with which we can all identify when the friends are all in Barbados and Ross's laptop crashes, losing his paper the night before his presentation, Ross is rarely ever caught up with the stress of academic work. When he does take an enforced sabbatical due to a nervous breakdown triggered by his boss eating his sandwich, the stress is related to his dysfunctional love life rather than his career. And think about how his getting tenure affects Ross as a character. Getting permanent work as an academic is clearly a hot issue these days, especially for younger academics. Beyond the extravagance of ordering a bottle of Israel's finest when he gets tenure, pretty much it doesn't affect him at all. Think about, for God's sake, how little paperwork, grading, and inputting of marks Ross has to do throughout the series. It's through the character of Chandler, however, that the show addresses the kinds of changes that Sennett, Ross, Greg, and others have charted. I want to suggest that the show does this through linking Chandler's lack of satisfaction with his job to the way he is positioned as having trouble with his masculinity. It's not a mistake, I think, that Chandler is exactly the kind of employment, or is in exactly the kind of employment that the anarchist anthropologist David Graeber has termed bullshit jobs. Graeber writes, in the year 1930, Keynes predicted that technology would have advanced sufficiently by the century's end that countries like Great Britain and the US would achieve a 15-hour work week. There's every reason to believe he was right. In technological terms, we're quite capable of this, and yet it didn't happen. Instead, technology has been marshaled, if anything, to figure out ways to make us all work more. In order to achieve this, jobs have had to be created that are effectively pointless. Huge swathes of people, in Europe and North America in particular, spend their entire working lives performing tasks they secretly believe do not really need to be performed. The moral and spiritual damage that comes from this situation is profound. It is a scar across our collective soul. End quote. So these are arguments that are gaining currency in the activist communities in the UK at the moment, such as the notion of fully automated luxury capitalism and other utopian versions of communism. In Friends, Chandler, then, is the personification of exactly what Graeber is talking about, until, of course, he finds his dream job late on in the show, advertising. And I think this should be considered one of the show's best work-related jokes. One recurring theme throughout the series is the fact that Chandler's job is pointless. And I have a clip to show you.
Shut up and put my table back.
Okay. All right, kids, I gotta get to work. If I don't input those numbers, doesn't make much of a difference.
And a joke attached to this throughout the series is that no one knows actually what Chandler's job is. I have a clip for that as well.
30 seconds on the clock. 5 correct questions wins the game. The lightning round begins now. What is Joey's favorite food?
Sandwiches.
Correct. Chandler was how old when he first touched a girl's breast?
14?
No, 19.
Thanks, man.
Joey had an imaginary childhood friend. His name was...
Maurice.
Correct. His profession was...
Oh, Space Cowboy.
Correct. What is Chandler Bing's job?
Oh, gosh. This has something to do with numbers and processing. Well, he carries a briefcase.
10 seconds. You need this or you lose the game.
It has something to do with transponding. Oh, he's a transponster. That's not even a word. Oh, no, I can get this. Oh, no.
So I assumed that everyone knew what the game was about, but the game, of course, is about the game has been set up in order to decide who gets the apartment, the girls' apartment. The girls want something from Chandler and Joey want their apartment. So at that point, because the girls don't know what Chandler does, they lose their home, essentially. There's another clip I've got as well to illustrate this whole no one knows what Chandler does thing.
Look, I'll just get my old job back.
No, I want you to have a job that you love, not statistical analysis and data reconfiguration.
I quit and you learn what I do?
So, and I'm going to go straight to another clip. In a key scene, the pointlessness of Chandler's job compared to the jobs of the others is made explicit. In fact, this is a slide, it's not a clip. So he says, I hate my job, I have to go back to Tulsa. And they're like, well, I love my job. So this is exactly what Graeber is talking about when he writes, quote, there's a profound psychological violence in the way that capitalism has eviscerated good jobs. How can one even begin to speak of dignity in labor when one scarcely feels one job should not exist? How can it not create a sense of deep rage and resentment? For Chandler, there are two resentments that are closely linked. One is his job, the other is his masculinity. Chandler stands out among the male friends because being effeminate is central to his character in a way that is not quite true of the other characters. While a playfulness towards traditional masculinity and heteronormativity is centrally a key trope in the series for all of Joey, Ross, and Chandler, with Chandler it is overdetermined. Yes, there are situations where Joey wears girls' panties because they are more comfortable than men's. He wears lipstick for a Japanese television commercial. He wears a man bag because it's so stylish, and even at one point realizes that he's turned into a woman in one episode after spending too much time arranging flowers with Ross's roommate, played by Al McPherson. But in the final instance, the key to Joey's character are his Italianness, his macho attractiveness, and his career as an actor, admittedly one that goes up and down. Ross, meanwhile, is the paleontologist, his parents' favorite child, the science geek who grew up to study dinosaurs for a living. Again, while there are countless examples where traditional masculinity is challenged through Ross's behavior or mannerisms, like when he plays rugby and gets beaten up, dressing up as B as a kid, the photo of the naked photo of Ross with his penis between his legs, pretending to be a girl. His heterosexuality is actually never in doubt throughout the series. He's always chasing Rachel. There are numerous jokes about him stealing his dad's Playboys. Along with being funny and constantly cracking jokes, however, Chandler's sexuality is his thing, his defining characteristic. The show regularly encourages us to consider Chandler's problematic masculinity and what the show positions as his dubious sexuality as attributable to his unconventional childhood, during which his mother slept around and his cross-dressing father has an affair with the pool boy. In another key scene that I'm reading in parallel to the fact that none of his friends really knows what he does for a job, Chandler's sexuality is the focus of scrutiny.
Question. You're not dating anybody, are you? Because I met somebody who would be perfect for you.
You see, perfect might be a problem. Had you said codependent or self-destructive?
Do you want to date Saturday?
Yes, please.
Okay. He is cute. He's funny.
He's a he?
Well, yeah. Oh, God. I know. Good, Shelley. Okay, I'm just gonna go flush myself down the toilet now. Okay, bye-bye.
I'm going to enjoy a cup of ramen noodles after that. I mean, is that ridiculous? Can you believe she actually thought that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I first met you, you know, I thought maybe, possibly, you might be.
You did?
Yeah, but then you spent Phoebe's entire birthday party talking to my press, so then I figured maybe not.
Huh. Did, any of the rest of you guys think that when you first met me?
I did.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Not me.
No, me neither. Although, you know, back in college, Susan Salador did.
You're kidding. Did you tell her I wasn't?
No. No, it's just because I kind of wanted to go out with her, too. So I told her, actually, you were seeing Bernie Spellman, who also liked her, so.
Well, this is fascinating. So, what is it about me?
I don't know. Because you're smart, you're funny.
Ross is smart and funny. Did you ever think that about him?
Yeah, right.
What is it?
Okay, I don't know. You have a quality.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah,
Oh, equality, good, because I was worried you guys were going to be vague about this.
Okay, so until his redemption, when he finds his dream job in advertising as a kind of geeky Don Draper, and he settles down in the suburbs as the head of a traditional family unit, unlike Don Draper, Chandler is like a comedy version of the narrator in Fight Club, an office-bound clone in a suit whose life is going nowhere, and whose job defines his helplessness. We might wish to argue that he's the personification of the ways that capitalism appears to eviscerate traditional masculinity while reaffirming it at the same time. And although Friends as a text encourages sympathy with the redemptive narratives of finding oneself and following your dream, the neoliberal care of the self mantras, I think there are enough examples to suggest that the text is also struggling with these ideologies, albeit through a layer of insulation. Thank you.